Welcome to Front and Center with Jacquie Jordan.
Anyone, I think, any human is ultimately capable of killing.
Communication is key in keeping people safe.
A person, in order to change his life, needs to have will and desire to do so.
This is Front and Center with your host, Jacquie Jordan.
Entertainment and pop culture expert Jacquie Jordan is with us.
Two-time Emmy-nominated Hollywood producer Jacquie Jordan.
We are the show where we talk with the change agents, the storytellers, and the activators, making impact from behind the scenes. This is the show where the storytellers, change agents, and activators from behind the scenes take their seat with us now front and center. In this episode, we're going to be talking about pop culture's obsession with behind the bars stories. Incarceration on shows like Tubi or Netflix's Orange is the New Black, and also most recently this mad obsession about Gypsy Rose Blanchard with the upcoming Lifetime documentary. New York Times yesterday, as of this taping, just did a story about Gypsy Rose Blanchard and basically kind of crafted this whole concept that with social media and our selfie obsession generations, we're now recording all of ourselves and all of our lives, which makes a story like Gypsy Rose Blanchard so much more enticing because it practically writes itself. Which reminds me of an HBO series that I just recently watched, Love Has Won, The Cult of Mother God. And what that was about was a woman who got a band of followers for a spiritual journey, but really she was a drug addict and they just it was a using cult. But because they were popular on YouTube and they had videotaped themselves, there was so much material that the story and the show exactly wrote itself, which is kind of the purpose of what the New York Times article was talking about here. In this episode, we're going to talk about 3 different versions of prison stories and behind the scenes from serial killers. I don't personally have a whole lot of background in that genre, but what I can tell you as a producer in my previous days, I used to carry the beat of serial killers and women who love them. And I used to talk to or collect phone calls from serial killers such as Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. And I would laugh to myself because I think to myself, my father had put me through college, and here I'm collect calls from Richard Ramirez, and he would say things to me like, "Jacquie, this is Richard. Can you take my call?" But at the time he was married, and so I would produce television segments or news segments with his wife. And it was a really, really odd time. There was a lot of accessibility to it. In the 2003 movie Monster, Charlize Theron portrayed Eileen Warnock, which was a female serial killer. So there were a lot of serial killer stories going on at that time period. And we've had an obsession as a culture with a lot of our television shows. And so my first guest is a prolific producer, filmmaker, and storyteller. His documentary, Black Serial Killers, Truth or Fiction, uncovers the heinous crimes of murderers who are not known on the list of famous killers because they are Black. He is a colleague and friend of mine. Please welcome Sean Reid. Why was it so important for you to tell the story of Black Serial Killers, Truth or Fiction?
It was a journey. I originally had seen the movie Monster back in 2003 and became curious. It's like, okay, I don't think I've really had ever seen a Black serial killer movie. So I started my research, and at that time it wasn't as available, and I kind of went down the rabbit hole, as a lot of people do, and started to discover a lot of misinformation, a lot of lack of awareness. Even today, when I ask people in my own family who I've told about it, they'll still kind of forget and go, "Oh no, Black serial killers don't exist." So discovering the fact that there was so much misinformation got me spurred on to the idea.
Well, it's so funny because I spoke earlier in the show about my background of having had the beat for daytime television of the producer for serial killers. We had Eileen Warnock on the show, Geraldo, back in the 90s before she was actually put to death. And, that was very, very startling. And I, having been a producer at the time, we didn't have, the way we research stories, it wasn't like it was easy or accessible to put that collateral together. And so you've done that. You've basically, re-archived telling that story.
If you'd gone in 2003 and typed in black serial killers, you probably get nothing.
Yes, and I was doing it like in the 90s when it was like pre-Google. So you're absolutely right. But you actually track that now on Google, black serial killers, and you've seen
and I have
and
for
you've
a while.
seen a difference in that.
I've seen it change. I've seen more information. Dr. Alan Branson, who I discovered early, probably about 5 or 6 years ago by doing one of those searches, had written a paper about the whole subject and about the fact that we were underrepresented in the media. So overrepresented in the crime, underrepresented in the media. And that's how I found him and started having conversations. Actually, was just a good old Google search.
And why is it so important that we recognize that there are black male serial killers?
Well, serial killers of any other race other than white. Let's put it this way. Let's be equal opportunity. Let's make sure that everybody in America, just like everybody else, has that equal opportunity. And within all of our sex, women, black males, white males, there are serial killers, and they do exist. They're still a low percentage of the population, but especially someone like Samuel Little, when you look at him, who's now the most prolific serial killer in U.S. history with 90, almost 90 confirmed, he roamed and committed serial killings for over 40 years over, multiple states. With the information of understanding that, there's a better chance of protecting some of those people and to have fewer victims on both sides.
Well, I want to roll a clip here from the soundbite here about the D.C. killer. Take a look.
Now you could just imagine during that, during the DC Sniper Task Force investigation, if somebody said, listen, you know what? I think it's 2 black guys riding around in a mobile sniper's nest going state to state, starting in Washington state and just shooting people. They would have looked at him like he was crazy, or her, and said, you know what, do me a favor, just go get some coffee and some donuts and we'll be fine.
Sean, we're talking on this podcast and in some of our other interviews. Why do you think we're obsessed with murderers? What's our cultural obsession with murderers?
I think that it stems from like the yin and yang idea. There's no light without dark. There's no happiness without sadness. And I think understanding the further that someone can go on that darker side, I think the higher that you can go on the other side. And I think it's just also necessary for protecting our society, our moral codes, and understanding what's happening to people as a result of systematic abuse, systematic racism, whatever those things are. We need to know more about them so that we can avoid being victims of those crimes.
What I can relate to also is, you and I've worked together before in television. I used to also work on a lot of missing children cases. I knew John Walsh, and I also was a little tiny girl in Florida when John Walsh's son, Adam Walsh, went missing. But through television, John Benet Ramsey was obviously one of the biggest stories out there. And when I did my research and found out how many little young black girls had gone missing that didn't ever get the national attention. And we still talk about John Benet Ramsey, and that happened in 1996. So I was aware at that time that I had to pause. I was like, well, what is this and what's going on? I think there's also a lot of signaling that goes on when when a particular story is just kind of pushed out there to an edge. I mean, that's just my personal experience. What do you want people to take away from your work with black serial killers?
Well, one, like John Walsh was a great inspiration and still is, because of him finding his singular voice and expressing and changing a lot of the way that we perceive crime and what we could do. And I think in furthering that idea, it's about what we can do as a amateur crime fighter on some level. The idea for me is that could be my mother, that could be my sister, that could be my brother, that could be my cousin, that could be any one of us. And if we turn our blind eye to these types of ideas and to these things existing, we're just setting ourselves up for being more victims. So ultimately, I want to give voice to that, and I want to give understanding to it that it's also a deeper issue. Systemically, we have an idea that Black people can't be specifically certain things, and we created that through Jim Crowism. So in fighting that idea, it's counterintuitive, I know, to say, hey, wait, Black people can be this too. But we don't want to promote the idea that any one race is capable of any one thing. That's negative for everybody.
And that rolls into the concept of victimology, which you've talked about.
Well, and that's true because victims often don't have a voice. And in this case, when you're looking at especially minority victims, Black victims, Latin victims, they're often in the press are going to be underrepresented, right? So they're not getting that chance. It's when that someone chooses a white victim, maybe, or a white girl victim, that is when the press goes, alarm bells, alarm bells. But how many of those, like you pointed out, how many of those Black children, how many of those Black people have disappeared before we got to that point?
Well, it's so funny. I honestly, I think like the number when I was producing for television, it was John Ben Abrams. There were like 27,000 children that were registered as missing, not to mention the children that like weren't registered as missing. So it's like, it was amazing to see like the incredible intense spotlight on one missing child. It was certainly, I want to just take some of our questions here. One of our questions was, which one of the serial killers is the worst, and are you going to be following up on that?
Well, I think that's kind of an interesting question. We delve into that in the documentary, and that's why we talk about Samuel Little a lot, and people tend to know. And now they're on the FBI website. You can hear him talk about it and reminisce about the different stories and see what kind of monster he truly is. But there's people like Harrison Marty Graham who really only killed, and I hate even saying that, really only killed. But he had 5 victims, but they were all girlfriends.
Right.
And they were all stored in his apartment.
Yeah.
And the only reason he really ever got caught is because they finally could smell it in the building, and finally got in there. And he had a lot of, he was mentally maybe disabled, maybe not. Maybe it's just from drug addled because he did so many drugs.
What do you think the universal commonality for all these killers is? Like, what drives them?
A lot of it's often, a misfunction, something inside of them. There's often a strong sexual component to it. It's hard to say what gets somebody, but there is an elevation that seems to happen to someone when they get through. So often rapists can become serial killers, or those sexual dysfunctions. So it just really depends.
It's not the type of crime where just someone snaps. It seems to be, it's way more premeditated.
Well, somebody snapping becomes more of a spree, right? Where they're actually they snap and then they're working and now they're just going. Serial killing is defined as, well, right now by the FBI is one killing, a cooling off period, and then another. It used to be 2 and a cooling off and another. So that gives a lot of room, but not really. The cooling off period is the key, because then you're looking at, I don't know about you, but I hate to admit this, but Crime and Punishment was one of my favorite books in school. And I think it was because of that idea of understanding guilt, and understanding the thinking process. So someone who could then go home and think about it and then go do it again, there's the key element to it. Anyone, I think any human is ultimately capable of killing.
Sure.
That's something that
we've given the right circumstances, pressure, dynamics. I do believe that, of course. I could see that.
And in our past, that was necessary to survive. No matter who you were, there would be times. So that doesn't stop anyone. So we don't say that our soldiers who are going and defending us and fighting wars who are killing multiple people at a time,
right,
are serial killers, because they're doing it they have a purpose, that they're being given a duty, that they're serving a higher purpose ultimately. This is not the case when you're looking at someone like a Samuel Little who has a strong sexual component, gets close to these people, knocks them out, and then chokes them and disposes them somewhere, to the point where most people didn't even realize these people might have been murdered. Yeah. He was so effective at it. And this is not a genius. This is somebody who has the ability to do that. And as Dr. Branson says, if you're successful at your predilections, doesn't that make you intelligent?
In a little crazy way, but yeah, I assume so.
Yeah.
How are you following this project up?
I'm following up. Longer than the documentary or the idea for the documentary. I had been working on a script on the zebra murders from 1973 and 74, so I'm almost done with that. I'm
Excellent.
also working on a documentary on the Atlanta Ripper, which is actually a case where, at the turn of the century in Atlanta here, where they were, the women were disappearing on the streets and being killed in very sadistic ways, very similar to the Jacquie Ripper. And I have my streaming network, World One. So we're working on a lot of things. Very excited. I'm very excited for the new year and the new projects to come.
Well, that's so fantastic. Give my best to your dad. Known your dad for a long time too. We can find the Black Serial Killers, Truth or Fiction. I found it on Tubi, but I know it's available on a lot of the streaming platforms, and of course on your streaming network platform as well. So thank you so much, Sean, for joining us. Really appreciate it.
There is a link between poor educational systems and correctional systems.
If someone's on probation, they are still under the purview of the government.
Welcome back to Front and Center. I'm Jacquie Jordan, and we are the show where the storytellers, the change agents, and the activators from behind the scenes make a difference are sitting with us now, front and center. And joining us is the first Hispanic prison warden, my friend Marirosa Lamas. Welcome, Marirosa. I love that.
Thank you,
30
Jackie.
years.
Yes, 3 decades.
3 decades. You've seen a lot.
I've seen more than most.
I
Yes.
believe that.
Yes.
I believe that. And what you also did, which I really, really love, is you produced a TEDx event. I've been a TEDx curator myself. So you produced a TEDx event with women, lifers, from behind bars. Tell us about that.
Yes, I helped and assisted. So the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania Department of Corrections started a TEDx in different facilities. I happened to be working at our central office at that time that the project started. And one of the facilities that we went to was the State Correctional Institution at Muncie, Pennsylvania. I had happened to be a warden there at some time prior to that. And I had the pleasure of working with some of my ladies. And one of the best TEDx moments was This Is Not Our Home, sung by the Lady Lifers at SCI Muncie. Yeah.
And lifers, like that means like they're there for life.
So the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania has what is called natural life. And so when one is sentenced to natural life, it is natural life. You do not get out. The only way to get out is through commutation, pardons, or an appeal. However, when you are sentenced, prior to any of those processes taking place, it is your natural life. So if one is sentenced at the age of 25, you don't get out until you're called home.
Could you define Commonwealth for me?
So, interestingly enough, Commonwealth is a term used by 4 states and that is how they wrote their constitution. And really, there is no legal difference between a Commonwealth and a state. It's in how their founding fathers wrote that particular constitution.
But it affects the prison system. Or the judicial system.
It can affect some of the judicial systems. Right. But honestly, it is a term used. Commonwealth and state can be not interchanged because
Kentucky, Virginia,
Massachusetts, and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So I'm rote in always saying the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
Yes, I've listened to you enough to hear you say that. It also means, if I'm correct, is that the Commonwealth can pursue a crime if the victim doesn't pursue it themselves.
That is my understanding, yes.
Yeah, that's kind of a unique law that you wouldn't know, which
yes.
makes state jurisdiction different within the prison system of things.
Well, I think it's just state jurisdiction versus Department of Corrections, yeah.
We were talking earlier on our earlier podcast about a documentary that our filmmaker Sean Reid did called Black Serial Killers, Truth or Fiction. And part of his reason for wanting to produce the documentary is from a pop culture perspective. We've glamorized white male serial killers, but serial killers come in all sizes, shapes, and forms is his point of view. Being in the prison system, like I mean, it was work for you, but people were coming in on all sorts of different crimes.
Yes. So in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, you get sentenced to state time, as they call it. It's 24 months up to life and or execution. So that's where it is. So I served, because leadership positions, in my opinion, are positions of service. So I served men and women who were sentenced from 24 months to life, all different offenses, drug offenses, burglary, robbery, murder, rape. So you have the spectrum. It's a big umbrella that they all fit under.
And as the first lady Hispanic prison warden, who then, and a superintendent, who did you report to? Like, is it the governor at that point?
So I reported to the deputy secretary. They reported to the executive deputy secretary and secretary of corrections. I had the pleasure of working for two phenomenal secretary of corrections, Jeff Beard and John Wetzel, both phenomenal men.
And you're also, with your background, was a hostage negotiator.
I did. I did do hostage negotiation and regional hostage negotiation when I was a counselor. I served my career as a counselor. So you get trained, because though everybody glamorizes, in my opinion, the flashbangs and 90% of great problem solving comes through communication.
Yes, you are a good communicator. For knowing you're a good communicator. And I find communication so important.
Yes. So if you're using all the toys in that toolbox, which is flashbang, smoke,
Wait, I don't even know what any of that means.
Well, smoke, you can smoke somebody out, or pepper spray, whatever.
Do you mean in language, like in communication?
If you throw something into a cell
Got it.
force the man or woman to come out, right? Well, you have exhausted your communications because you're only using that 10%. I am of the mindset that use your 90% communication. And so as a hostage negotiator, you kind of learn, really redefine and really hone in on those skills. Communication is key in keeping people safe.
And yeah, that's important. Wow.
That is huge in keeping people safe. People believe that they are going to be safe by a multitude of things. Communication really keeps you safe.
Oh, in talking with you earlier about this, you had said that there was, it only takes a second, any of us could be behind bars.
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't believe that. I don't believe folks who say, I would never. No, you don't know the circumstances. You don't know how it is to live in a row home with a drug-addicted mom and your father's in prison. You have no structure. You don't know what it is to come in and find your spouse in a compromising position. You don't know what it is. There's a whole scenario. So I really looked at the inmates, the offenders, however, Mr. and Mrs. is what I used to call them, as my next door neighbor, and but for the grace of God go I. There was nothing different about the incarcerated men and women that I was privileged to serve than me. There was nothing different. So judgment comes out the window. You stop judging. It's not my place to judge. It's the gentleman or the woman with the, black robe, went to school. That wasn't me. My job as a warden is to ensure that the community that I serve gets a better human being once they are released than they first came in, because that human being is going to be your neighbor.
What do you think is our pop culture obsession with criminals? We've got Netflix's Orange is the New Black. When I was producing television, my only time of actually going into a prison, by the grace of God, was here in the state of Florida. I actually went to see a young man who was on death row and was, because Florida changed their laws, he was a minor at the time. Florida changed their laws, and so he got commuted to life sentence. And so I brought my talk show host, Maury Povich, down to it. And when we went into the prison, I had to have a security clearance, no makeup, no jewelry, hair pulled back in a bun. And it was for a story of they called him the vampire cult killer. And it happened during the time that Court TV had just come out. So, if you can popularize a crime with a fancy name. But he got put on death row for 16. And don't get me wrong, the crime was heinous. But it also got out of context because he got the label as a vampire cult killer. So when I went and saw him, I think he was 16, 17, or 18. But what I saw was a scared boy, a very, And so in spite of the whole media story around it, I just saw, a human. He's still behind bars. He's at 39 years old, and I'm sure that's what you see all the time. But, one of the most famous movies is Shawshank Redemption. So is there redemption?
There's always redemption. There's always hope. But I think the media and pop culture is fascinated because they never think it's them.
Right.
And so when you kind of depersonalize it, then you're okay with whatever happens. I don't watch any of the prison shows. Now, I'm a Dateline freak.
You do watch Dateline.
Oh my gosh, who doesn't? And don't get a burner phone before you are going to divorce your wife when you have a mistress.
And a life insurance policy.
And a life insurance. Just a couple of tips. But with that being said, people are fascinated with corrections because they think it's like this underworld of crime, and the corrections officers are always up for sale, and they're not. They're not. Commonwealth of Pennsylvania Department of Corrections has some of the most professional corrections officers in the nation that stand head and shoulders above anybody.
Yeah, not according to the Orange is the New Black.
Exactly. And so it's, it's tantalizing. It's, oh my God, yes, that's well, no. They're hardworking men and women ensuring to keep their communities safe. And that's the bottom line. Is there a rotten apple? Unequivocally. But pick out a profession that there isn't a rotten apple in.
What could be improved with the correctional system?
Education, programming, all those things. I'm a huge advocate. You could close down all correctional facilities if you would put those monies into the educational system. There is a link between poor educational systems and correctional systems. They call it the gateway, the highway.
Well, and they're both investments in our community and our citizens in our community, and how citizens are going to serve our community. Education and corrections.
Correct.
I mean, with the word correction, meaning that it's meant to correct.
It's, that's an old term, but yes, it's meant to correct. It's meant to rehabilitate. And that pipeline, so if you give one skills that they can make a living, it may not be the living that they had before, right? Cognitive-based therapies, it's proven that they will result in changed behavior. So I'm a big proponent of education.
So what are your favorite stories of redemption that you've seen?
Every single day when, I had an opportunity to meet with one of my lady lifers, and I met her for coffee, and I met her for lunch, or some of the men that got commuted. I see their careers taking off. It for me, and I certainly cannot speak for any other superintendent, as we call them in Pennsylvania, or warden, how joyful that is that you were privileged enough to help this person in a time of their life and help them to be and get where they are.
That's stunning.
So, yeah, I loved my job.
It's a stunning
I loved
service. Yeah, I get that from you.
Yeah,
That's
it's a great job.
extraordinary. Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, thank you so much for sharing that.
It has been my pleasure.
The first Hispanic lady prison warden. That's awesome. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for making a difference. Real change agent.
Thank you so much.
Front and center. Yeah,
my
thank you.
pleasure.
If you'd like to find out more about Front and Center, please check us out here on Rumble or any other place that you listen to your favorite podcast. I'm Jacquie Jordan, and we'll be right back.
The 6 pillars are recovery, housing, employment, finances, relationships, and healthcare.
We are the Broadcast Podcast, front and center, where the change agents, storytellers, and activators from behind the scenes take their seat with us now front and center. Joining us now is Barbara Richards from Project 180, and she runs an organization that helps reintegrate former prisoners into the community and to be of service to the community. And this is so important because we've been talking in the last couple interviews here at Front and Center, everything from serial killers to our pop culture fascination with crime and behind bars, and there's so much media and television out there, to what goes on into the prison system. And now we've got Barbara joining us to talk about how we transition folks out there. Why is this important, and what is the mission statement of Project 180?
The mission statement is Project 180 seeks to reintegrate formerly incarcerated citizens into community life. And that means that we don't try to force anybody. We provide the open doors for people to come in and do the work to do it themselves, because it is a lot of work and it can rarely be done alone.
So this is a model that could obviously be replicated in other communities.
We hope it will be replicated in other communities because it's very successful for many reasons. It's successful for the individual, and currently we're working only with men in our residential program. It's successful for their families, and it's definitely successful for the community. And I say that because if someone reenters the community from prison or jail and they're not prepared, they don't have any advocacy, the likely result will be homelessness, unemployment, further criminal behavior, poverty. And through our organization, through our residential program since inception, we have probably prevented about 55,000 crimes.
Wow.
Right.
That's an important statistic.
Yes.
A noteworthy statistic. I mean, the way I see it is, we watch the movies. You're let go. You walk out. You just walk out the door, and I guess it's kind of like that. And if you've been in prison for a period of time, then you lost technology, right? Accessibility. Like, you're not going to just go get a bank account.
Correct.
I mean, you've got to first have to get an iPhone, but you have to have $1,000 to get an iPhone. Like, is that? Am I understanding that?
You are, because incarceration is our more modern form of banishment. So we banish people behind walls. We are unable to see the punishment. In the old days, it was done in, like, talking about 400 years ago, in a public square, and everyone observed that this person had been punished, they had paid their dues, and then they were very quickly reintegrated into the community immediately. And we don't do that anymore because we don't see the punishment. We don't have that effect of how shall I say it? The deed is finished. It's all finished now.
Right. It's like, just put it away. Like, you
Right.
put it away in a closet. You don't have to deal with it. It's
Right.
It's
And-
complete.
And it's a social contract that we do it that way now.
Right.
So when people get out, when we pick them up at the bus or when we pick them up at the prison gate or the jail, we usually see people who have a small
So you do
baggie.
pick them up at the prison gate, like just
If-
like in the movies,
Yeah,
right?
if they're within 3 hours
Right.
of
Organization,
Sarasota,
sure.
right? So we'll pick them up, and they have usually just a very small package of, like, a baggie, or
And that's what they're starting with.
That's it.
Yeah.
And so you think about all the
That
things
feels like
that
an
we
impossible
need.
task.
It does, and in fact, they have a word for that. The guys who
Oh.
are getting out, they call it the efforts. And the reason they say that is because there comes a point where it is so frustrating to try and put your life back together again, or to put it together for the first time, that you get so frustrated that you just can't do it. And you say, F it, and you go back to what you were doing before.
In my previous interview, I talked about a story that I worked from a media perspective, because it was my first time inside of prison, state prison penitentiary. And just even the process of going in as a visitor to see an inmate was pretty extraordinary. And it was a story that got a lot of media sensation, especially when Court TV first went on the air, because it was known as the vampire cult killer. And the kid had shaved his teeth like vampires, and his crime was heinous. And he got commuted from death sentence because Florida changed the law from giving a death sentence to minors to life in prison. And I think he's about 39 years old right now. I always felt that he kind of got an unfair deal because of the media coverage. It's kind of like when a story gets so much bigger than the case itself. And we've seen that a lot happen. But I always think if he did get out at this age, what he's missed since being 16, like I wouldn't even know how you see a human being function like that. It's almost like a time travel.
It's very difficult, and the person does need advocacy on the outside. What I say is a person, in order to change his life, needs to have will and desire to do so. But that doesn't mean you know how to do it.
Right. The how is different than the want.
Exactly. And so that's where we come in, and we provide a safe environment, pardon me, for
Kind of
individuals.
like a halfway house?
Somebody who didn't know what we do might call it a halfway house, but we call it a residential program because we provide comprehensive, in-depth help. We have 2 caseworkers for one person might have 6 to 7 people working with him. We provide food, we get the person a phone, we get them clothing, we welcome them in as if it's a family. And it's really what everybody needs when they come back.
And your retention rate? Project 180's retention rate?
Retention would be how long they stay in the program.
Okay.
So the minimum stay is 6 months unless we ask you to leave before then. And the long stay is up to 2 years. So the recidivism rate, which is rearrest for a new crime, is pretty low. The national rate is 44% within the first year. And in Project 180, it's 14%.
Oh,
so 44 to 14.
That's a significant difference. So instead of it being half, it's less than 1/4. It's almost
Right.
20%.
Yeah, it's 30% less.
Yeah.
So when you have somebody coming out and you don't help them, it doesn't serve the individual.
Or the community.
And thus it doesn't serve the community. So, we're lowering recidivism rates. We're keeping people from homelessness. We help them with their finances so that they can begin to save money. We charge as little as we can per week. It's a $200 program fee per week.
And you probably rely heavily on donors then.
And we rely very heavily on donors, primarily foundations and private support. We don't
You
use
don't get grants, government grants or anything?
not government grants. No.
Interesting.
No.
Oh, yeah, that's fascinating. And so, are you as a part of the organization responsible when someone commits the crime again?
Could you say that again?
Just in a conscionable way, is the organization responsible if someone goes back and commits a crime again? Like, is it like a failure? Like, how do you differentiate or distinguish? I mean, are you just like, oh, we did the best we could, or do you meet them back where they're at?
Well, we have taken people back in
Okay.
after they've left. Usually when someone leaves, it's because they see something shiny out there,
yes.
right? So they might want to leave because
They got a
a
girlfriend.
girlfriend, or they want to have a dog,
Yeah.
or they are they want to use again.
Right.
And very occasionally somebody will use in the program. We do not allow them to stay in the house that night. They have to go to detox and get it out of their systems. And then if they want to come back and they want to participate fully in what we have to offer, we usually will take them back.
So it must feel really good to see people become, job trained, successful, and contributing members of society. Because ultimately, that's the goal. I mean,
It is,
That's
and
what we want.
It's like magic.
When I first learned about this, I thought it was brilliant. I thought how do people get out and start? I mean, I'm an analog girl in a digital world, and I can highly function, and it's still sometimes a frustrating reach. And so I thought, how does that happen? And how does society benefit from people if they're not being, moved out? Can you also just describe some of the services that Project 180 provides?
Sure. So when someone comes in, as I mentioned, we get them a phone, we get them new clothes. We don't go to the bargain bin and get used clothing. One man said very graphically, "I am so glad I didn't have to go to a box of somebody else's underwear
after
and dig
being-
through
yeah.
it.
Yeah, it's like giving their dignity back.
Exactly.
That.
That's exactly what it's about. So we get clothes, we'll get tools for them to get started at work if they have something lined up, because the guys are great workers. So some of them have a job, lined up. We provide housing. There's a very close relationship between incarceration and homelessness. They feed on each other in a cyclical manner. So we stop that cycle and provide this, essentially long-term housing. For someone to graduate, they have to actually be able to have an apartment that they can go to that's safe and affordable. We work with introductions to employers if the person doesn't have someone in mind. We help them with finances in terms of helping them budget and get started with that. We have these 6 pillars of stability that we go by, because getting someone to the point where they can stabilize their life is really a large part of it, because they've been in this reactive mode for years and years. Some of our guys have been using since they were 6, 9, 12 years old, and they never had the opportunity, because of their disease, their addiction, to learn how to operate as an adult in the community, a responsible adult. So that's what they learn through the program. And the 6 pillars are recovery, housing, employment, finances, relationships, and health care, because most people have not taken care of their health, and that's very difficult to do when you're locked up, and it's very difficult to do when you're on the street. So we partner with several different places in the community to get medical, dental, vision, and mental health care.
And one of the questions we were asked by one of our followers is the question of, does anybody coming out, are they truly entitled to all the rights that all citizens have when they come out? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, yes and no. If someone's on probation, they are still under the purview of the government. And at that point, there are limitations in terms of travel and sometimes even where you're going to be at any given moment of the week. But once all the dues have been paid, they're just like you and me.
And you were called to do this, right? Like, just simply, you were called to do this. So this is just you're living your dharma and your purpose.
Yes, my passion. And when you say I was called to do it, that's very true. I didn't feel like there was anything else that I could do
or should be doing. And and you had a calling, and you actually followed it. So I really value that.
Thank you. Can I let you know about something exciting?
Sure. Yes. Please.
2 individuals in the Sarasota community have produced a film about the men of Project 180, and we will be premiering it on October 11th at Michael's Zone East. So if anyone's interested in our program, please look us up on our website, project180reentry.org, and come see the film.
That's awesome. That's awesome. It's project180reentry.org if you'd like more information, like to participate, volunteer, donor, or go to the upcoming events. Thank you so much for joining us, Barbara. Thank you so much for being here. Truly a front and center, perfect guest. I really appreciate that. If you'd like to know more about us at Front and Center, please subscribe to us here on Rumble or any other place that you like to listen to your favorite podcast. I'm Jacquie Jordan. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining us on the Front and Center with Jacquie Jordan podcast. Please subscribe to us on YouTube and follow us on Instagram at TVGuestpert. We'd love to hear from you.